we are focused on producing biblical language, Greek and Hebrew translation resources for minority language communities who don't have scripture. Oftentimes they already have a church, but they do not have a Bible that they can read themselves. When we write a reference grammar, when we write a teaching grammar, etc., or a dictionary, all of those actually have their own perspective. And that perspective tends to be Anglo-centric, it tends to be German-centric, French-centric, etc. And those things then in turn have an impact in their usability on the field for Bible translation. So then that plays out also in the context of any sort of topic of grammar.
We make a key distinction in how that in our cognitive processing. So we recognize the difference between our subjective perspective and and objective reality, and we recognize those as different. So in early childhood, we perceive ourselves and our fellow peers in the world as intentional agents in the world. And then we recognize in our human processing that our perspective, our subjective perspective, is different from another person's subjective perspective. So we understand that someone else might see a scene, a similar scene to us, differently than we do, because of the way that we perceive from an embodied perspective on the world. We see from a vantage point or a viewpoint, and that necessarily then is reflected both in how we think about the world and then how we express that in language. Part of our work is to map out all of the usage patterns we can find in as many ancient texts as we can get our hands on, right? How are they used? What are the scenes they're used in? What kind of trajectors, that is figures, do they collocate with? And also what landmarks or the ground do they collocate with? Are they used primarily with people, primarily with objects? Are they used in scenes that involve conflict? And all of these kinds of different investigations that we can do to see what is the image schematic structure that these prepositions activate and mediate, such that we can get an idea for where they're used and then why they're used in the places that they are in the text. So one of the things that prepositions do allow us to do, because they set a spatial scene and they help create a spatial frame for characters to interact with one another inside of it, they help us to interrogate the text and understand how the scene is set up, who's in front of who's behind who's around, who can be seen, who can't be seen. We can start describing what inside of that spatial, what are the key elements inside of a spatial scene that help a reader or a signer or a hearer, et cetera, help the audience understand how those characters are interacting with one another and what are the social cues in place. By the choice of expression that we use, we put things in profile or in focus. We make something a figure and we make another thing a ground. This is especially true with prepositional uses, where something is the focus and it's related in its context to something else as supplying the point of reference for how to understand who that person is or what that thing is or what they're doing and how they're interacting. So it helps us, even in just listening to a story, as prepositions are used, we might not necessarily notice them because they're often very small or short words, but they help us build a scene of a mental model in our head so that you can follow the story and understand the scene because of your own embodied experience of knowing how things in space interact with one another. And your understanding of a story, when someone tells you a story from, say, the Gospels, if we have translated it well into your own tongue, then you can get a mental model as you build up the scene and know, and you can get the right cues about someone who might be a teacher who is above and in front of other people who are all surrounding that person. And you would understand that that person is someone of authority just by where they are in space in relation to everyone else in the scene.
In Mark 2, with the paralytic being lowered down through the roof, you actually have this striking instance of this phrase, pros tein thuran, toward the door. And the perspective of that expression is one that sort of the narrator Mark is taking Jesus's perspective. So we have this sort of ability to shift perspective. So, I mean, the narrator exists outside the world, and the narrator can choose whatever they want to sort of frame the situation. So in this context, Mark takes Jesus's perspective, and Jesus is looking at the crowd of people that he's teaching, and he sees that the house is full all the way toward the door. And then in turn, that sets the scene for why these four men with their paralytic friend need to go through the roof instead, because the door is blocked, the house is full. And that contrasts really, really nicely with Mark 1:32, I think, where that same prose phrase, toward the door, is used from an outsider's perspective. So Jesus has just healed Simon Peter's mother, and everyone in the town is amazed by this grand miracle. They are bringing all of their sick, all of their demon-possessed to Jesus to heal, and the entire town is gathered toward the door. And so now we have, from the outside, someone on the other side of the crowd looking at the house and seeing this massive crowd of people toward the door, still, again, blocking the entrance. But it's this different perspective. One, inside the house, the room is full, the door, and another, someone standing in the town looking at the house and seeing this great crowd also toward the door. So they're just opposite sides of the same door, and two separate perspectives. When we talk about prepositions, we have a trajector and a landmark, and the preposition functions as the relator between them, whether in space or in some abstract domain. And in Septuagint Judges 4:5, there's this scene that's set up, and where Deborah is sitting under the date palm of Deborah. And when we think about that scene, the viewpoint is someone perhaps at a distance, and we see Deborah out here, and we see the trunk of the date palm go up, we see the leaves form a canopy, and Deborah is sitting there. So it's sort of just a profile of the date palm and Deborah beneath it, from some distance where we can see the whole of the tree. And that's that perspective of this external observer looking at the date palm. And then in turn, as another example, in Enoch 24:4, we have another example of a prepositional phrase with the same tree, where the author is describing the leaves around the fruit, peri ton karpon, they were like date clusters. And then, so now we've moved, and instead of being at a distance looking toward the whole tree, we're now standing at the base of the trunk, and we are looking straight up. And we see the palm leaves coming out in a circle around the fruit of the date palm, and the leaves basically form a circumference around it. And these are two perspectives of the same tree, but they're defined, and their preposition usage is defined by the subjective position of the observer, whether from a distance or from immediately underneath. On a practical level, this work started when Logos Bible Software asked us to do a little lexicon of prepositions for them. And that turned into, I mean, it only exists digitally, but it ended up not being so little. It's about 50,000 words when we gave it to them. But that constituted a sort of, we did a data analysis that was very sort of quick and dirty and makes sense to us if we look at it, because we have all of the background information for understanding what we're doing. But then that formed the basis of writing these descriptions of the prepositions and both their spatial usage and how those spatial usages relate to their abstract ones. So building the semantic network of each preposition and articulating why they mean what they do. Since then, with SIL, we have been taking that initial sort of very coarse set of data, and we've been cleaning it up. We've been making a lot of things explicit that we knew and trying to add information to it that's meaningful, so that more people can benefit from it. One of the questions at this point is what kind of format it'll be available in. And we're not sure of that. We are partnering with Clear Bible, which is another translation organization. They are primarily software focused though, and also biblical language research similar to the stuff that we're doing. They will likely be supporting us in terms of making access available. It will also likely, we hope, be integrated in some capacity with Logos Bible Software. Also because Logos Bible Software has a relationship with the larger Bible translation movement as well. And a lot of the tools and resources that SIL generally produces need to end up there so that translators can use them. We hope to have something available online as well. And perhaps a larger print book that sort of discusses prepositions in detail, that sort of functions as a cognitive pedagogical grammar of prepositions and prepositional phrases. Our work at SIL and doing biblical language research using cognitive linguistics for biblical language research is a brand new enterprise for the organization, and we are the beginning of it. And we've only just started in the past year, 18 months or so, and we are still trying to figure out what a lot of our long-term work will look like, both in this project and beyond, and also who we can partner with, who we can engage with to make it more than just the two of us doing this work, because there's so much to be done in cognitive linguistics and both Greek and Hebrew, and there's just no way that we're going to be able to do it all ourselves. So building community that is collaborative and actively engaged with shared goals is something that is constantly on our mind, and we want it to be on the minds of other people as well.